Hello, my name is Renee L. Rose. I'm the founder of Explore Art Talk. With Explore Art, our featured guests, we have meaningful conversations celebrating artistic and cultural diversity that makes our world extraordinary. So sit back, relax, and check out our content. Thank you for joining us today. So, why don't you start off telling me how you got yourself into art? How did you do this?
So basically, I got myself into art ever since I could remember. I was two, and I remember I used to love picking up pens, scribbling whatever I could. And I used to think it's like, oh, I have to be completely finalized with an idea as a kid. And I was very stubborn to begin with. And it took me a long time to get into like more finer works. But I really started since I was a young child. It's always been attached to me from the cartoons I watched to anything I do, like regular like graffiti art on a wall. It was always interesting to me.
So, in high school or grammar school, did you take art class?
I took one art class in high school. I never truly seriously pursued art until college, but it's always something that's been attached to me personally.
So, when you started college, what college did you go to?
The University of North Carolina in Greensboro.
Oh, wow, I've heard of that. Okay. So, you're majoring in art, or
Yes.
you are. So, tell me all about your experience with your art classes at the university.
So my experience with them has been ever so amazing. We're one of the few schools in North Carolina that actually have a metal casting foundry. So I've got to pursue such avenues as sculpture, specifically welding and metal casting that I got to do a numerous amount of times. Very grateful for that opportunity. But my specific major is printmaking and illustration. And
Oh,
so, along with that, I've managed to experience the classic forms of relief printmaking, such as
wow.
woodcut relief, printmaking relief. But I'm more biased to the more finer ones like copper plate etchings and my favorite of them all, stone lithography to be exact.
Oh, wow. Wow. So do you have a s- a particular medium you prefer? Is it sculpture or is it printmaking or is it both?
For me, it's specifically printmaking. Sculpture is coming up the ranks along with it
Wow.
because, especially after this semester, I realized how much I enjoy working in fabricating metal. But printmaking's at the very top, in my opinion. And I feel that both printmaking and illustration, you you can be a great illustrator, and by proxy, you be a great printmaker. But flipped around, and some leeway, but printmaking and illustration, that's always a strong tie for me.
So what do you do your illustration by hand and by computer?
I predominantly do mine by hand
Oh,
for my practices. If it comes to certain practices, I'll look specifically for found images collage. Like there was example one collage I did way back when, to where instead of just cutting them and collaging them with paper, I would scan each individual page and crop it out, and then overall combine it into a collage. So
oh, that's
I
really fun.
yes.
Wow, that's really interesting. So tell me more about your illustrations, how you started and how they evolved, and where do you think you're going with that?
So specifically for my illustrations, I really enjoy tackling a bunch of figurative work. I rarely would step out of figurative work, and it started as a kid to when I would see it's like, hey, the cartoon's on TV. Let me see if I could draw what I see on TV.
Oh, wow.
It led to more being as like, hey, how can I express how I view myself? And then it became more of a portraiture perspective. And now I see the guides of illustration as, hey, how can I capture what I feel and how I feel around the world within drawing?
Okay. What are you trying to convey to your audience when you're doing all your figurative illustrations?
When I do my figurative illustrations, I particularly, sorry, my eyes burning,
That's okay.
but when I do my figurative illustrations, I particularly try to convey to my audience is like, hey, I want to put you in the shoes of what I'm viewing, or hey, this could be like an outer experience of being the fly on the wall of a specific setting.
Oh, okay. Okay. So tell me, you said this year you just started getting into sculpting.
Yes.
So did you pick the medium of doing it with sculpting with what you said it was with steel you're doing with
Yes. Steel and iron.
and iron? Wow, tell me all about that. That's interesting.
So for the gods of steel and iron, it's really great to do metal fabrication because metal, specifically steel and iron itself, are like really cheap. So
Oh,
for
okay.
like a 20-pound sculpture, that would cost about like $6 of steel. And so
Wow.
being able to learn how I could take both my illustrative practices and the vast display of illustrations I make and see if I could manipulate it into a three-dimensional form, that really fascinated me. And I like the industrial like strength of metal because I always joke with my peers that I don't think I'd be able to get into ceramics because I feel like I'd manipulate it too well and I couldn't find a thing to think around it. But having various metals to have to hammer, bend, process, cut, it's really fun being able to shape it versus I do an illustration or I do a series of prints and I'm done. A sculpture is okay, I've shaped this form. How's this going to connect with that? And then how's this going to
Oh,
connect with that? And then the display aspect is a whole nother ballgame that I'm really interested in.
oh, tell me
Specific
about that.
Yes, I am very excited about how I love displaying the sculptures because I specifically enjoy usually making either wall piece or active sculptures that sort of move. And I always think it's
Oh,
funny. I
wow.
love making wall piece sculptures, knowing absolutely full well that there is no place in my house they could hang
So
because
they're
it's a
really
tool.
huge. Are they
Yeah,
really huge sculptures?
one's about the largest one that I've made so far is about half of my height, and I'm about 5'5".
Oh my
So,
God, that is large. Yeah. I
and
like
it
that.
protrudes straight from the wall, like straight out in a divot motion. And
Oh,
so that
wow.
20 pounds of just weighing,
And that would take a lot to even hang.
yes.
Wow. So the moving sculptures, have you started to really um, produce some moving sculptures, or you're just in the process of learning?
I'm just now in the process of learning how to get interactive and moving sculptures because I think it's cool on the fact that you're able to interact and see conveyed movement within a non-living and non-organic thing. And I feel like it correlates perfectly with the industrial sense of how most metals are portrayed. It's like, hey, this thing does this to interact with this, but what if it moved playfully, jovially?
Oh,
Like, there's this recent sculpture that I made called Playtime is Over, and it's like a giant pair of like chattering teeth and eyes. And I managed to do a thing to where if you press the jaw down, it kind of bobbleheads itself, and
oh,
I nicknamed it a glorified McDonald's toy in sculptural form, and I love it so much.
oh, wow. So do you have a favorite sculptor or sculptors that you like in the world?
I haven't found really been able to dig my nails into the history of sculpture as much as I've done printmaking yet,
Yes.
but I'd say a modern sculptor that inspires me currently right now is my foundry professor Kevin Vanek.
Okay.
They're an amazing sculptor, and that's not only as a professor sense, as a sculptor sense, because their
Oh,
work really pushes me to do a lot more expansively because they're actively coinciding and working alongside us. Versus, I teach this and it's a separation. Is versus, hey, I'm working alongside y'all.
Oh, that's like a mentor.
Yes.
Yeah, that's really nice. So, for your Gen Z generation, where do you see art evolving to another different level, or do you see a lot of Gen Z artists kind of expanding on what's been done before?
I feel like a lot of Gen Z artists are going to expand heavily on what's done before, and
Okay.
sort of
Ooh,
we don't realize it yet, specifically with movements such as Dadaism, Surrealism, because I feel Gen Z art is really focused on the abnormality of the world in the same way Dada artists and Surrealists were focused
oh,
after World War I. And I feel that we really enjoy expanding on that, although it's not predominantly known as like expressionism and cubism. I feel like subconsciously those movements portray us the best, so we're doing a broader expansion on what we've seen in that.
so why do you think that movement portrays you guys the best? Explain.
I feel that Dadaism and Surrealism portrays us the best because Dadaism was particularly seen as a portrayal of how can we critique our society and have an element of play and fun in our art. And I feel as a part of Gen Z, we are much more hypercritical of the society we live in versus the
Yeah.
past two generations that we've had, to where we're a little bit shaken up to where it's like, hey, I know my grandfather and my father might have thought this, but I see a little something different and I want to convey how I see that a little different. And we also have a form of humor to ourselves that's not generationally seen in comparison to everyone else.
That's
And
true.
so I feel like Dadaism is the perfect conveyance of that, but to a modern era now. And then for surrealism, we live in a bizarre world. And I feel like for each generation, not only Gen Z, we've tried to capture our take on how that bizarreness appeals to us. And I feel it has only ever so increased with the age of the internet and how we can continuously like grasp upon it and view it.
Do you think the internet, how do, or let's put it like this, how do you see social media interacting with your art? Or does it even interact with your art? How do you feel it plays, with your art practice?
I feel social media heavily plays a part of my art practice,
Oh,
specifically in how I release my work versus because I feel like social media has gone into such a narrow, you do this, it boxes you into that. You do this, it boxes you into that. To where, and then since I enjoy in certain aspects, if I'm looking, it's like, hey, there's this printmaker that I follow. They have another printmaker, and then they have sculptor friends. But I love having that kind of toss and turn. I always have a phrase that I love to say is like, never fully open your palm. Which is never fully show what you're going to give to your audience. And I love
oh,
never fully opening my palm to where it's like, hey, there's two prints and they have this sort of thematic sense. And then there's
oh,
boom, there's this sculpture it has a different
oh.
thing. And then there's this illustrative thing to where people could go back. It's like those pieces tie to that, to where I want to encourage my audience to go back and visit my portfolio through a social media standpoint to see where my headspace was at the time.
Oh,
What conveys do I still explore these themes, kind of make them broaden their horizons about what they see from like, oh, what did old Jimmy post 2 posts before? It was like, hey, what did Jalen's art piece and I talked to him the other day. Is like, how does this currently relate to what we are currently seeing?
do you post any, you don't have a TikTok platform, do you?
I do. I don't use it. I feel like I can't portray my art in short term content. I want to get my piece out in sort of a stagnant gallery s mode is how I see social media. To where it's like, there's the piece. I give a description to where it's like the audience is sitting with it, they're thinking with it. I want them to chew it and not to have a quick bite, then go to the next video to where it's like, oh, look at this print I did. I do this. And no shade to that content. I really enjoy seeing that content. It's just that's not my lingo. I would look like a fraud, in my opinion, if I were
Oh,
to do it.
so you've never done any videos of you working in the studio?
I've tried to capture videos of me working in the studio, but they're very quick, brief, one and dones, especially if there's something I'm experimenting with,
Oh, I
like
think you
fairly
would be
new.
interesting doing videos of your work,
Hmm.
especially with the sculptor, because you're so expressive and you're so into it. I think it would be stimulating for people to see you working.
Hmm.
You ought to try it.
I should. I'll give it a go. I'll give it some thought.
Because on Instagram, I look at a lot of videos because I'm an artist too. I love glass blowing. I've never taken classes and stuff, but it's so fascinating to see them in the process. And because you do metal work, that's not just like, I'm not there's anything wrong with sculpture, I mean, painting or doing other mediums, but those are fascinating mediums. And I think it would draw people in. You can post it on Instagram. You don't have to do TikTok because a lot of artists do post them working in their studio and it seems to draw attention because people are curious.
Hmm.
I bet you people would be curious about how you develop your pieces. Even with printmaking, I think it's different that you're even into the printmaking because that's a form that's really, especially with newspapers and what's going on, that's not used as much since everything's so digital. That would be fascinating for people to see you actually cut out your pieces to do your collages because some people may do collages differently.
Hmm. And I believe that draws me back to certain practices, especially with lithography. And I really want to push lithography, at least my lithographs, really hard in other lithographs I see, because it's such a finite part of printmaking that I want to get back out. Because although it's done on a stone, it's fairly
I
new in
think
comparison.
I think it's amazing. I don't know any young people that are doing that. That's unique. How did you get driven towards that?
So I took a lithography class in the fall because
Oh,
I recently declared my major as drawing and printmaking. And so
okay.
when I discovered drawing and printmaking, I took a class. I was like, huh, lithography. I wonder what that is. And then I tried it out. And although I grew up, I always joked as like science was my worst subject. Lithography is the perhaps, in my opinion, best printmaking practice I'm good at. Although it is extremely science driven, and
Why?
so
What is so extremely science driven about it? Tell me.
so so for lithography, in comparison to other processes, usually you take what's called a matrix, which is the thing you do the printmaking process on, and it's done on a giant limestone that is usually grained. And after you take grease, grease concentrated utensils and
Ah,
draw an image, you etch it into the stone with rosin, talc, which is rosin. I'm trying to think what it is. I forgot. It's orange, but talc
yeah.
is, it could be used as a French chalk, baby powder, and
Okay.
then you take gum arabic and then you etch it into stone. And depending on how
Wow.
much you want to speed up the process, you add a certain amount of drops of citric acid to etch it into the stone. And so
That
what that
sounds
does,
complicated.
yes, I know. It leaves the grease residue on the stone of what you've drawn, and the heavier the grease is, the darker the ink will be on the
Oh,
print itself. And so after the grease residue is washed off and the gum arabic is washed off with water, where the grease sits, the water won't. And lithography is basically the process of how grease and water don't interact. So
yeah,
wherever
they
that
don't.
grease residue is, you roll it up in the grease ink, and so it just fills it in slowly, and it
Um,
won't set in where the water is. It's really cool to look at in person. It's really fun to
So
do.
when you do it, you have to have in mind what you want to draw because it doesn't look like it's a lot of, you can't make a lot of errors with doing that process because it's permanent, right?
It's not permanent, but there is a lot of step backs you'd have to do if you'd
Okay.
want to rearrange your image.
That's what I
For
was
example,
wondering.
instead of using an eraser, there's basically either per se an etching needle or a scraper to where it's like you take it to the side, you scrape it, and then another factor of it, since it's based on grease concentration and people have natural oils in their hands, you can't touch the stone when you draw on it because your
Oh,
hand will try.
wow. So
You have to
how do you keep the stone in place to carve in it?
Um, I usually lurch over it. I'm really short, so I'll usually have like a little step stool. I'll linger myself over it, and I'll
Oh,
take the grease utensils and I'll draw whatever I'm doing. And usually, whatever when I do images for lithography, I'll get the lightest because there's specific lithography crayons. I'll usually either get the lightest or get a graphite pencil because I know graphite doesn't transfer onto the print, do a rough outline sketch, and then I just start filling in shading values.
so where do you get the stone from? I mean, I know that sounds like a crazy question, but what kind of stone is it? Is just any kind of stone or
I believe it is limestone,
okay.
and there's various places where lithographers get their limestones. I
Okay.
think some
'Cause
of
I
the
know where
ones,
there's limestone used for other places, other things that you can go. Okay.
and I believe some came from, if I'm correct, Puerto Rico and some from Egypt.
Yeah.
Those stones are as old as can be, and
Because we have limestone in this country. We use limestone for different things. Yeah. Wow.
mhm,
That's interesting.
yes, I love lithography.
So that's going to be definitely part of your practice.
Yes, for certain.
Yes. So how many exhibitions have you had?
I've had so far nine. Nine.
Wow. That's a lot.
Yes, I've been very excited and for the slew of exhibitions I've done, and I believe this year I made it a goal. Is like by the end of this year I want at least seven done, and I cleared all seven in March, I believe.
Oh, wow. Are these group exhibitions or solo or both?
Both. The the latter six were group exhibitions, and I had my first solo show this year.
Tell me about your solo show.
My solo show was named Not Just Black and White because I want to deal with the concept of being an alternative rural black child in Southern North Carolina. And I really enjoyed tackling that concept for a solid 3 months and how I
Oh,
previewed my
wow.
ways of the world. And I tackled it with sculpture, illustration, printmaking, and I believe one of my favorite pieces that I did for that show, it was a giant collage in a way to where I did a giant Indian ink painted figure, ripped it in half in the middle with a cutting measure bar, a tear bar. That's what they're called. Yes,
Yeah.
a tear bar, and then I collaged a figure in the middle to put under it and glue under it. And the piece is called Flesh and Spirit. And so I
Nice.
want to make a piece dealing with the dualities of dealing with both the flesh and the spirit and how they're literally the inverse of each other. In a way, I excitedly got to portray that is for the spirit. I painted the eyes inverted color.
Oh,
So it would
wow.
be white, black iris, white pupils, black highlights, to where if the piece were to be inverted, you'd see the inverse. And in Christian beliefs, I was always taught the flesh is opposed to the spirit and vice versa. And I want to represent that in a both manifestal terms and literal terms within that piece.
Oh,
So I
wow.
really enjoyed it.
That's nice. What part of North Carolina are you from?
I am from I'm from more rural North Carolina where it is I don't know if you know Sanford, North Carolina, but I specifically do my practices and my works within Greensboro, North Carolina.
And that's like a rural area?
Greensboro is more of, I'd say, urbanized North Carolina,
Okay.
the Triad area.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. That's cool. That's really cool. So, where do you see yourself in the next 2 or 3 years? Where do you think you want to take your practice? Where do you want to do?
I want to take my practice to a more curatorial level to where
Oh,
want to help both curate and continue making art in my practice to interact with more printmakers of my nature and understand more artists around me. And I want to try out more residencies because I recently did my first art residency this summer.
where
And
was
so
your residency? Where is it at?
it was in Greensboro in the lovely gallery space known as Greensboro Project Space.
Oh,
I
no.
really got to enjoy doing that.
Would you like to travel like to other states or abroad to do residencies?
Yes, I would love to travel states and abroad to do residencies because I really want to see how my work and me as a person would interact and bounce off. It's like, hey, what if you got sent to Maine?
Oh,
How
yes.
would a little southern boy react being in the brink of Maine, just making
Yeah.
art all my
Oh, it sounds like you would really fit in and just, it would be perfect.
yeah.
It would be, and even if you go to Europe, that would be interesting.
And then Greece, Italy, France.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. So, is there okay, so let me ask you something. Since you said you want to do more curatorial process, so you want to curate shows based on printmaking themes.
Not only printmaking, but based off of alternative experiences.
Oh, okay, just period. Yeah. And
Because a big part of my practice I really enjoy being able to do is be the artistic hand that I sometimes don't get.
oh,
And I really enjoy mentors that I've had over the past years. Is like, hey, there's this opportunity. Because not everyone's going to have it like that. And so to be
yes.
able to give back to a community that has so fostered me and be like, hey, I know y'all have helped me out in the bunch. Here's some opportunities for y'all. And then
Oh,
also
that's
being able to
nice.
see how my practice coincides right along with it.
That would be really nice. That's really inspiring. Well, I really appreciate you taking out the time to do your video with me. You are
Thank you for having me.
fascinating. Jalen, I was so excited when I saw your work. I was like, I can't wait to talk to you. You are really inspiring, and I'm definitely going to be keeping up with what you're doing.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me again so
Yes.
much.
Okay. I will talk to you later.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Bye bye.
Bye. Have a good one.
You too.